started here.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're glad that you're here. For those who are on the phone, we are actually in the process of screen sharing right now. So my name is the Reverend Vernon K. Walker. I have the privilege of being the program manager of CREW, Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, and we're excited that you're here. Just would like to share some ground rules, and then we're going to go right into this presentation, and then we're going to go into the next portion. We just want to share about muting. We got most people muted to be able to support everyone's ability to present and to be attentive. And we also are recording this section, but we will not be recording the breakout sessions, so you don't have to worry about that being recorded. This is the second annual Interfaith Summit, brought to you by the Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, with a host of other partners that we will get into. So we have been blessed to be able to partner to put on this with a robust planning team and organizations such as the Massachusetts Peace Action, 350 Mass, Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries, the Boston Mountaintop, Mothers Out Front, All ACE Incorporated, Speak for the Trees, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, FEMA. We have JCAN. We have Massachusetts Communities Action Network. We have the Boston Public Health Commission, and these are just some of our partners who have helped us bring this event to you today. And we want to thank each and every one of them for doing such a tremendous job in helping us bring this. We can go to the next slide. In regards to muting yourself, there's a mute on the right side of your screen. It's a mute button, looks like a microphone. And also, for people who names is not in the chat, you can rename yourself if you pick the little browser that you have. If you have the browser, which is I believe on the right side, if you put the browser on your screen, it'll rename you. You can have the ability, then it'll pull it down on a drop-down menu with the 3 blue dots, and then it'll rename you. And you can we would like for you to rename yourself if it's not popping up. And the reason we ask you to do that is because we want to put you in the appropriate breakout section that you've indicated. And we want to make sure you get where we want to make sure you fit in with one of your preferences that you have let us know. So you can rename yourself by hovering over your name. And then again, it's going on the right side. It's going to be like blue dots, and then it's going to bring a drop-down menu. And you can and please rename yourself first name and last name. If we go to the next slide. So we have our agenda today, folks. We know that it's trying times. We know that Coronas is out here causing damage, and we know that these are not ideal circumstances. As we wanted to be in person, but because of the coronavirus and because we like to follow the CDC guidelines and we believe in social distancing, we don't want anyone to get sick. So we've been able to do this and move this to a Zoom meeting. And again, we're so glad that you have joined us. So we're going to go over the agenda today real quickly. The next person you'll hear speaking after me is John Luke from the North American Indian Center in Boston. He's on the board of directors, and he will do a welcome. And then after that, we have Dr. Tallison. Dr. Tallison will define for us resiliency. Then we're going to have our keynote speaker, Leslie Jonas. And I know that some of y'all can't see the agenda that may be on the phone, but this is just going over the agenda. Leslie Jonas is our keynote speaker, and we're so glad to have her. And then from 2:50 to 3:20, we'll go out in the breakout section to spiritual approaches to climate resiliency. And then so that's 320 to 350. And then 350 to 355, we'll have next steps and resources by Craig Altimos, Executive Director of the Better Future Project, as well as crew. And then 355 to 4 o'clock, we're going to have a closing prayer by the Rabbi Shoshana Friedman. And we have an awesome program packed for you all. And we're going to the next step. And we want to bring in John Luke and ask him to do a welcome for us. Thank you.
Hello, Henny Hotu. My name is Jean-Luc Furit. I am from the Tunica Biloxi tribe of Louisiana. So like many of you, I am a guest on these lands. And here in the greater Boston area, we recognize it as the traditional indigenous territory of the Massachusetts Nation, who continue in part through the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog. Now, when we have a land acknowledgement, we want to call into mind sort of the intentionality around why we're doing these things. We're not just saying things just to say like, oh, I'm a guest, oh, I'm here, and this is sort of the character of the land, almost in a historical type of way. But what we're actually doing is making it an active process in which we are making agreements with our hosts. And so when you picture yourself going into somebody's house, there are certain rules that you abide by. Don't leave messes, don't take only, what you need, and you're basically kind of just contributing to the overall story of the place where you're at, because not only are we talking about the people, but we're talking about the land that is alive, that has its own spirit. Usually when we have this practice, I ask people to sort of like close their eyes, and if you can just join me for a minute or two, if you're comfortable in your own space. I just want you to close your eyes and think about the place where you are right now. I know that we're not all bound to the same geographical space, but just think about the place where you are right now, and perhaps the solid land where you're standing on right now. If you project yourself back into time, perhaps a few centuries or so, the solid land where you're at right now may not have been solid land. There might have been water there. But you think about, you think about that space, you think about where the water is at that point, you think about where the land is at that point, you think about the people that that were born there, that lived there, that fell in love, had families, and died there. And then what I want you to do next, just kind of like project yourself back to where you are, bring yourself back to the present, think about the space where you are right now, think about the neighbors where you are, think about the building that you're at right now, and think about sort of the impermanence of everything. Think about perhaps a time in the future, maybe the near future, maybe the distant future, where the building where you're at right now is no longer there. Think about your own descendants. Think about the people that are living within that world, and think about sort of the world that we're cultivating today. What are we leaving for our own descendants? What is the story that we are crafting today that will contribute to the overall well-being of the people that will be on this land? And so if you can just reopen your eyes. Again, we're on the traditional indigenous territory of the Massachusetts Nation here in the greater Boston area. And like I said, they survive in part through the Massachusetts tribe of Ponkapog. So we're all making agreements at this point. We're all making sure to do our part to steward the land and to support the efforts of that tribe. But wherever you are, if you're in a different indigenous territory, think about your own neighboring tribes. Think about all the efforts in order to rebuild and protect their lands, and think about what you can do to support that. So with that, I wanted to again, recognizing myself as a guest, but I'm Jean-Luc Cariz. I'm a member of the Tunica Biloxi tribe. Back home in Louisiana, my family does language and culture preservation work for our tribe. And here, I live in Jamaica Plain. I work in Boston, but part of my work is being president of the board of directors of the American Indian Center of Boston. And together with the combined history of Boston Indian Council, we have provided cultural and social services for the New England Native American community for 50 years. And so we definitely have a legacy of activism, of people that have empowered themselves. We talk about the urban Indian population nationwide. American Indians are represented in urban areas. Over 70% of our populations live in urban areas, away from tribal lands. Some of our tribes, some of our tribal lands right now, our tribes are impacted communities. Back in my own home state, there's the Ile de Jean Charles band of Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw who have lost 98% of their land since 1955 due to rising sea levels and coastal erosion. And here, and I know I want to make sure that we all are feeling the call to action to support our keynote speaker, Leslie, and all of her kin at the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, as the Secretary of the Interior on Friday had moved to disestablish their reservation. And so across the nation, across the planet, indigenous peoples' lands are at stake, but more so than their lands is our traditional knowledge, and which has informed our ways of living sustainably. We have our ways of being, and it is through those ways, it's through our traditional knowledge, our spirituality, yes, but also our sciences as well, that has empowered us to live sustainably. So with that, I wanted to offer a song and then a few words from my mother, and then I'll close with one other song. So this is our Tunica Daybreak song. Yu-wee-oh, yu-wee-oh, yo, 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 yu-wee-oh, 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 yo, 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 yu-wee-oh, hey, yo-kya-ino-ya, hey, yo-kya-ino-ya, yan away, yan away, yan away, yan away, yan away. Woo! So this is, as I said, this is words composed by my mom. So I'm going to offer this as sort of an opening meditation. I'm going to repeat I'm going to say the lines, and then I'll give the English translation after each line. This is in our heritage language of Tunica. So Wantaha, Latij, Tata Haishi, Hemakuch, Pawe Hanitak Eni. A long time ago, at night, the moon waxing above was the only light, it is said. Kishtahake, Yanuchi, Yatakoma, Tarko, Hotush, Rompant, Kalina Ara. Still here, doe and fawn stand near the edge of the woods. Kishtahake, Latich, Chushi, Riku, Kichu, Ukikata. Still at night, owls perch in trees. Kishtahake, Latich, Nere, Katotu, Tetita, Pitatani. Still at night, spirits walk everywhere on the road, it is said. Chomu, Halukini, Onimahoni, Akishi, Lautakata. Bobcats run in the back of the Indian village. Talatarku, Kichu, Mishtikitok, Kalura. Further in the woods, Cain is standing. Ishtahaki, Estamili, Harihipu, Haita, Narakata. Still, red-tailed hawks fly above the dance grounds. Hachi Hechi, Inimat, Animahoni Sema, Hehali, Haita, Hishtahaki, on Iti. Now here, we Indian people, on our part, still exist on this land. That's from my mom, Donna Parit. She and my sister, Elizabeth Parit Mora, our culture and lifeways instructors in our language and culture revitalization project. So I'm gonna give one more song, and this is more of this is a social dance song, but this is one that is that's picked out for this program. So thank you. Oh teria teria he, oh teria he, ya he ane, ya he ane, ya he ane, ya he. Oh teria he, oh teria he, ya he ane, ya he ane, ya he. Oh teria he, oh teria he. Whew. So with that, Tikach, thank you, and please enjoy the summit.
Thank you so much, John Luke, for carrying us through and sharing with us those precious songs. Moving right on in the agenda, we like to call Dr. Tallison, who's a friend of mine from the Boston University School of Theology from our days there. We like to call her, or unmute her rather, and she is going to lead us in the goals of this summit.
Thank you very much, Vernon, Reverend Vernon and Craig, for inviting me to be a part of this summit and to introduce it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see the slides that I put together. Okay. Reverend Vernon, did that work?
Yes, that looks good to me.
Great. All right, so thank you again. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm feeling really blessed right now by Jean-Luc's welcome. I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about the way that I talk about resilience and the work that I do in climate resilience chaplaincy, and the ways that it is a kind of foundation for the empowered engagement that we need at this time, and how some frameworks that I've developed that allow us to think about ways in which our traditions can help provide that foundation of resilience. Resilience is usually talked about in terms of adversity, how we manage it in the time, and how we recover from it afterwards. So sometimes it's helpful to think a little bit about what barriers are to resilience, there are, let's see, I wanted a pointer. There we go. There are kind of psychological barriers that people have, especially people that are engaged in climate work. And then there are also some structural barriers that I have here. And then there are also barriers for people who aren't actually engaged very much, and the barriers to their engagement. So I kind of think about, barriers in those different ways. And then you can think about how to address them. So we want to move from those places, the areas or psychological or structural barriers that were listed on the previous slide, into groundedness and preparedness and sustainable kinds of engagement, outreach, and activism. So the kind of psychological resilience here, and the kind of preparedness and structural kinds of resilience, and also the ability to engage politically too. So anyway, when I think about resilience, sometimes it's helpful to step back a little bit and look at climate resilience through the lens of the work of people that do primitive skills and survival skills. The practitioners and the community talk about survival in terms of what's called a sacred order of survival. The sacred order of survival prioritizes shelter first, and then water, and then fire and food. And the reason for that is that in certain survival situations, you can survive for 3 hours without shelter before dying of exposure, for 3 days without water, and for up to 3 weeks without food, obviously depending on the individual situation. And all of these are important, and figuring out how to build this kind of preparedness and to these specific areas, shelter, water, fire, and food, they do help build empowerment and reduce anxiety in the face of, for example, extreme weather or a pandemic. But people in this field also talk about how these practices for shelter, water, fire, and food rely on a foundation of what's called mindset. And without that resilient survival mindset, we're unable, or at least less able, effectively to use the survival resources and practices when the time comes. And so having that mindset can mean the difference between life and death in a survival situation. So I use this framework to talk about climate resilience in general. I also use a few other frameworks. One of them that I find useful is to think about how, it's such an enormous issue, and breaking it up into zones the way they do. So I've studied permaculture, and they talk about zones of use in permaculture in terms of how to be in our ecosystems in ways that achieve balance and equity. So I've applied that idea from permaculture to the idea of resilience, so that sometimes instead of just feeling scattered all over, like one day I'm doing this and one day I'm doing that, so wait, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Then we can think about these zones, and it just helps us organize our thoughts and break things down a bit when something so big is we're trying to wrap our minds around it. So that can be helpful, just to think about which areas we're working on in a given moment, and there may be overlap, partly because resilience in each of these areas, self, home and garden, neighborhood or congregation, community, whatever those are, city and town, region, country, and planet. And resilience building in each of these areas helps reinforce and support synergistically resilience in the other zones as well. Another thing that I find helpful is just to try to distinguish areas of resilience. These are general, and sometimes they can overlap, of course, but just another framework to try to sort out our thoughts on resilience. Each of these areas, political activism, sort of preparedness in a practical way, pragmatically, and Sabbath, what I call Sabbath, each of them is important. They're all equally important. And faith communities can plug into each of them, and traditions. I've put Sabbath on the bottom because in a way it's a bit foundational for nurturing that resilient mindset, but each of these can also, as I said, build motivation and empowerment. And I like to distinguish these because sometimes people focus on one or maybe two to the exclusion or neglect of the others. And it can just be helpful to be aware that there are other areas that we can focus on and that they're each important. Now, when I think about the three areas, politics, I think about political engagement really gives us the biggest bang for our buck when it comes to wide sweeping changes and the impact that's needed in order to try to turn things around. Preparedness but there's a lot of burnout, right? Preparedness is more about skills and infrastructure. This can really help people feel empowered or reassured to have alternative ways of heating, during the winter, or loss of infrastructure disruption due to, for example, extreme weather or economic instability. Sabbath, I use as a term for all the things that nourish us and give us the clarity and strength that we need in order to do all the work that we need to do. And it's just as important as the others. And in some ways, it does help really with that mindset. So sometimes we can get a little bit scatterbrained and we think, oh, well, why am I doing this sort of Sabbath moment thing? I should be doing political activism, or I should be going. And so sometimes instead of beating ourselves up about these things, we can just sort of name, no, I am building resilience. I think about it in terms of a journey. And each step on the journey is helping contribute to this resilience. So sometimes I also think in each of these categories that we can identify small, medium, and big kinds of acts or practices or processes, and identify them as also working synergistically to build the kind of resilience that we're looking for. I think of small things or acts as things that you could kind of do every day. Medium are the kinds of things you might be able to do once a week, and then big things like you could do once a month or less often. And one of the reasons I find this helpful is that sometimes, again, we can wonder, why am I doing this small act? I should be doing some big thing. Is this small act really making a difference? But the small acts, when we see them mindfully as part of this overall picture of resilience on a journey that we're building together, we can see that the small acts contribute to what we need in order to do the medium and the large acts. And when we do these medium things, over time, they may become easier and they may feel more like small acts to us. Everyone's different. Everybody's going to have a different sort of map of different things that they like to do. And I think for kids especially, to feel like their contributions are making a difference and they matter. The small acts don't replace the big acts. They're just part of this larger picture. And doing them in community can be even more fun. So as we engage, we change and we grow. And a big part of this is just noticing. So sometimes I encourage people to try to find a way to be mindful and to notice the resilience that they're building by creating some kind of tangible map of what they're doing. Maybe spend a bunch of time identifying small, medium, and big things in these areas that call out to you. Design maybe a resilience goals or processes that you're hoping to move toward. Brainstorm about it in community with others. And then as you start to do those acts, some people like to use artwork, or maybe create some actual physical stone path or other structure, maybe journal, or make a sacred altar of some kind. And so just before I end, I wanted to give you one small example of what I'm talking about. So one sort of small Sabbath act that I sometimes do is I take an inspirational song or quote and I just meditate on that. And that's something I can do every day. So I'm going to share this quote with you by Dr. Cornel West. These oppressive systems are mighty, but they are never almighty. What breaks the back of fear? Love. And love is the ability to learn how to die. So just taking some time to sit with that and feel how it challenges me or helps me get in touch with grief or lament, maybe inspiration and hope, whatever that does, is a mindful act of resilience building for me. So, yep, in closing, I think there's a kind of fierceness that this moment in our history is calling for, that can enable us to face it with a song even. So I look at fierceness as a way of just noting and naming that it's time to mama up, and we need to get outside of our comfort zones. And we can do this if we do it together. We need to talk about things we don't like to talk about, like white supremacy, or we need to roll around in the dirt, or whatever we're being called toward that we feel like we can do if we're working together. I find the African American spirituals to be a particularly powerful resource for this kind of work. I've quoted a few here on the bottom, but all of our traditions have really powerful resources to offer for moments exactly like this one. And there's a comfort in knowing that our ancestors understand. So we're not alone, and maybe it's our privilege to work together for the healing of the creation in this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Tallison. Next up, we want to present our keynote speaker. I'm going to read just a brief portion of her bio, of her extensive bio, and many of the great, wonderful things that she's done. Leslie Jonas, and I quote from her bio, Leslie brings an incredible energy, enthusiasm, and dedication and experience to each and every one of her jobs and projects. During the past few years, she has been focusing on climate change from the indigenous perspective. Currently, her work, she works with the Native Land Conservatory and has led to her speaking publicly on climate change and producing an educational video tool for audiences across many disciplines. So without further ado, we'd like to bring and welcome Leslie Jonas to the platform, to the Zoom, to share with us a message we think that will bless us.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Can Craig help bring the slides up?
Sorry, Leslie, I actually think you have to do that on your screen. I don't have the slideshow. Sorry. I think if you click share from the center there, as you did before, the bottom center, the big green share.
Yep.
Go to the perfect.
Koe Kwasun, Natasuis Mikwan Nipawak. Good day. I am Leslie Standing Feather Jonas, member of the Eel clan of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. I want to open by giving thanks to Reverend Walker and crew, and to Jean-Luc Perit for his songs and his kind words, and inviting me to speak here today, and to say also that I hope all of you and your loved ones are well and safe during this very difficult time of the pandemic COVID-19. Today, I speak with a heavy heart as my tribe, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, is suffering what I call a frontal assault by the federal government, who has threatened our homelands by taking land established in trust to be taken out of trust, threatening our existence on this very land. I also want to say that we are in the light, and we will remain in the light in the face of such aggression during a global pandemic that's reaching each and every one of us. My opening, and I changed this a little bit as a result of the news as of late Friday afternoon. I've changed a little bit to share with you a Wampanoag language prayer that our teachers helped to develop for all of our young students at our Makayasak Wikyu, our children's school. And they recite this together every day in class before they study together. And it just simply couldn't be more helpful than right now during this current climate of extreme fear. So I believe it's important for everyone to hear and remember these traditional core values before I begin my presentation on climate change. We are here to give thanks and to affirm our traditions. These considerations we intend for our community and also the world. These are our traditions. First, be respectful. We are mindful of our environment and of the people around us, and we are careful to not cause harm. We are careful of other people's space and their bodies. We embrace individuality because we are all created differently, and we celebrate our unity as one extended family. These are ways we demonstrate respect for our elders, our families, our communities, our peers, and our children. In the same spirit, we demonstrate respect for all other living and non-living things. It has been this way, and it will be this way forever. Be honest. We will be honest with ourselves because truth exists whether we speak it or not. It has been this way and will be this way forever. Be compassionate. Acknowledge others' life experiences and offer help to those who need it. It has been this way and will be this way forever. Be humble. We recognize that we are but a small part of a large and intricate creation. We are sustained by the plants and animals from which we take life. And so we should give life at every opportunity. We are humble before our Creator for giving us life. We are humble before our elders because they have walked this earth before us and have made the paths which we follow. We respect all living things on this earth. It has been this way and will be this way forever. Be brave. We are strong and we fight for our rights and against injustices. It has been this way and will be this way forever. Be grateful. We appreciate all the gifts that our Creator and our ancestors have given us. We appreciate life and the earth which sustains it. We are thankful for our lives and our time on this earth, and that we are able to spend with our loved ones. We are grateful for our families because they show us how to love. We are grateful for our peers, for their contributions as members of our extended family. And we are thankful for the children and all future generations who will learn from us and this experience and continue to carry them with tradition. It has been this way and will always be this way forever. Give thanks. On to my presentation. My opening qualifying statement for this presentation is that I speak from the Indigenous perspective. I don't profess to be a scientist, an environmental engineer, nor a biologist. But I, along with many other Indigenous people, do live here, like many of you as well, on Turtle Island in coastal New England. We live on this land, we breathe this air, and we eat our local foods, the fresh fish caught in our oceans, fresh produce grown and harvested from the many local Massachusetts and Cape Cod farms. And very importantly, we practice Indigenous life ways that our ancestors practiced that are very, very connected to this land. It's impossible not to witness the grave effects of climate change in our lives as we know it today. I know many of us personally try to live greener lives by being open and aware and educating ourselves on renewable and sustainable practices in the hopes of reducing our own carbon footprints. Daily, we hear and read about the growing effects of climate change, and without question, understand it to be one of today's most pressing issues. I will share only on a couple of these issues due to time constraints this afternoon, as we know there are many factors that contribute to climate change. After all, without Mother Earth, we have nothing: no air, no water, no food, and no life. Unfortunately, it is still debated by many as a political, partisan hot topic. But for we natives, the climate change issue is dire, so serious because our life ways and our cultures may be threatened. Without comparing to non-native lifestyles, as I fully understand the climate change impact is universal, I will try and share how this threat can potentially change who we are and how we live as a people. This is about who we are. This Massachusetts, Cape Cod land and seascape is in our DNA. The power of this place is in our identity as Indigenous people. It's our connection to our history, our ancestors, to one another, and to all life on this land. Climate change is all around us. Warmer and warmer days with more violent hurricanes, heavy rainfall, explosive storm surges with extreme flooding, and wildfires that take out hundreds and hundreds of miles of wildlife, forests, homes, and people are just some of the in plain sight obvious signs. But with these warming patterns, the environment doesn't get a chance to rest. It doesn't take slumber. But what we've witnessed as a result of the earth warming and not resting is becoming more and more dangerous to both nature and our existence. Invasive species are flourishing and spreading disease, insects that can hurt us, don't die off. Diseased mosquitoes and ticks that are now making it through the warming winters are a perfect example. New beetles are killing our trees. Wildlife comes closer and closer to domestic areas due to the threatened food sources in the woods, like desperate coyotes lurking through the night in neighborhoods in hopes to find food. But another really important example, and I'm going to become a little more focused because there are lots and lots of examples of climate change and global warming. Some of the ones that we witness here in Massachusetts are just pervasive. It's the white-tailed deer, which have multiplied exponentially, changing our eastern forests. My home abuts Beebe Woods in Falmouth on Cape Cod. That's about 400 acres of conservation land. And it borders Woods Hole, for those of you who know Cape Cod and the islands. Populations of white deer roam here at alarming rates. The deer come right into my front yard and backyard and look at me without fear. This is my backyard. Now, this may appear fascinating, beautiful, even majestic as a great natural resource and part of our ecosystem. And it is, but the deer population issue has definitely become a growing conservation problem. For we indigenous people, deer or venison is a primary food source. But according to Cool Green Science, a Smarter by Nature publication, no native vertebrate species in the eastern United States has a more direct effect on habitat integrity than the white-tailed deer. In many states, deer populations continue to rise well beyond the norms. According to recent data produced last September by mass wildlife biologists, there are now more than 95,000 white-tailed deer in Massachusetts. Densities include more than 80 deer per square mile, 80 deer per square mile in various areas of eastern Massachusetts. In many areas of the country, deer have changed the composition and structure of forests by preferentially feeding on select plant species. In fact, Cool Green Science cites that one study found forest songbirds, and we all love these beautiful birds. We listen to them every morning and really just enjoy their presence in our lives. They prefer nesting in the shrub and the intermediate canopy layer, and they've declined in abundance and species richness as the deer population has increased. The damage is both slow and cumulative, and often the harm is overlooked and dismissed, or worse, accepted as somehow natural. So there are serious ramifications that may appear natural on the surface, but have far longer term damaging effects that are deemed completely unnatural. Many will argue that this increase in the deer population isn't connected to climate change. However, we natives feel that it is connected given the longer growing seasons, which provides more food, and the decreases in their predators due to global warming. Bob Weinhold, a Massachusetts environmental journalist, in his article on climate change and health, the Native American perspective talks about the raw drive for survival being a common thread that often compels people to change their behavior. Many indigenous people are feeling the effects of food shortages and physical displacement as a result of rising seas that is attributed to climate change. What this means for coastal people is the threat of dislocation from our ancestral homelands. Undoubtedly, sea rise will impact everyone living on or very near the water. Indigenous cultures are directly tied to our ancestral homelands, reflecting our indigenous perspectives that includes the power of traditional knowledge or wisdom. In this native place, thousands of years of ancestral wisdom, oral tradition, and life ways in this very place. As climate change increasingly threatens tribal nations across the globe, for coastal people, it can change our cultural identities and practices. Essentially, climate change for Indigenous people means that ancient life ways could disappear or change, and our cultural practices tied to the land become threatened. There's a fair amount of data on climate change effects in regions like Alaska, Pacific Northwest, Southwest, the Great Lakes, and Florida, where larger tribes reside. But what does it mean for we smaller coastal tribes and others living here with the growing threat of warming and rising seas? Warming and rising seas threaten our traditional and ceremonial places near and on the water. It threatens Indigenous communities' access to vital resources. Traditional foods such as fish, game, wild, and cultivated crops, which have provided sustenance, as well as cultural, economic, medicinal, spiritual, and community health for generations. Some native coastal communities are being forced to move inland, relocating to higher ground after experiencing more extreme storm surges, flooding, and sea level rise. A late October meeting held in Falmouth on Cape Cod by the town's conservation department looked at climate change vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning for coastal resiliency through a presentation made by the Woods Hole Group. This is an international research organization that specializes in climate change strategies. Led by the group's coastal scientist, Elise Leduc, the presentation data proved to be quite compelling. And while I don't get into the scientific minutia, the vulnerability assessment confirmed a daunting future for our coasts. Ms. Leduc has done numerous shoreline change analyses in support of coastal erosion assessments, and she has been an integral part of the ecological risk assessments teams working on environmental risk assessments and evaluating FEMA flood hazard zones and potential climate change and sea level rise impacts on coastal flooding throughout coastal Massachusetts. Essentially, and these are alarming, she stated that sea level rise is the fastest it's been in more than 2,000 years and will result in more frequent flooding on the coastline. For we folks here in the Massachusetts area and living on Cape Cod, the current state projections show an estimated 10-foot rise in sea levels by the end of the century. Closer data reveals a 1.1 foot sea level rise by 2030, 2.4 feet by 2050, and a 4.2 foot sea rise by 2070. Many of us will have to push back to higher ground, and while you and I may not have to move in our lifetimes, many of our children, grandchildren, and great-grands will. Scientists and coastal resiliency experts can begin disaster risk reduction and remedial plans to slow it down. And in the best possible case, turn the global warming clock back a bit. Now, reality may dictate that it's impossible to turn the clock back when the seas have been rising for thousands of years. However, in building climate resilience, sovereign tribal nations often work with a variety of partners in innovative ways to integrate traditional knowledge with technology tools. And it's this collaboration that's going to be key in moving forward. It creates a diverse research method to effectively address climate change and related impacts in a culturally appropriate community context. 3 years ago, Inside Climate news reporter David Hassemeyer wrote an eye-opening article on the sacred land of Isle de Jean-Charles in coastal Louisiana. A small community of Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw Indians has called home for a couple of centuries. It has been basically swallowed up by the rising sea, leaving residents with little dry ground in a fear they'll lose their heritage. For the Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw Indians, that means moving their whole community north to higher ground. The slice of land that had supported the tribe through trapping, fishing, and agriculture for 170 plus years is drowning into the Gulf of Mexico. Since the 1950s, the tribe has lost 98% of its land to rising sea levels, coastal erosion, and flooding. The island, about 50 miles south of New Orleans and once covered 15,000 acres, has eroded to a tiny strip measuring a quarter mile wide by a half mile long. This is a reality, folks. Once the home of 400 people, the island now has only 100. According to the tribe's deputy chief, the fear in Indian displacement is as the people leave, our culture goes with it. Very importantly, the relocation of the Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw people will help to drive the discussion of Native people into the climate change conversation. We simply have to be at the table. We Indigenous are among some of the most vulnerable to losing our homes to the onslaught of climate change. Along with the Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw of Louisiana, a number of other Indigenous communities face the prospect of becoming climate refugees. While this daunting climate change phenomenon proves to be threatening and culturally challenging for we coastal tribes and people, it also provides an opportunity to strengthen adaptive strategies in preserving our native cultures by forward thinking and proactive work, by staying a little bit ahead of it in vulnerability assessments, coastal resiliency and adaptation planning efforts with local, state, and federal partners. It's a collaborative effort. We have to work together. Securing these partnerships to work together and identifying trends in dangerous growing patterns of destruction to the environment will prove to be promising. We have to work together with a variety of partners in innovative ways to integrate the traditional knowledge with technology tools and diverse research methods to again effectively address climate change and its related impacts in a culturally appropriate community context. For tribal people, it's important that our communities stay together. Keeping us together means keeping the fiber of our community strong. And in doing so, we are able to protect and preserve culture for the next 7 generations to come. Katapatanamu. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Leslie. Thank you so much. We appreciate the breakdown and the knowledge and wisdom you have provided to us. To continue to push the program along, we are now, people of goodwill, sisters and brothers, we are going to go into our breakout sessions. But before we do that, I'm going to read just a quick description of each facilitator. We are blessed to have a lot of extraordinary and talented and gifted facilitators who come from many different walks of life, and we're so glad that they are here. We're so glad that you're here, that you've taken time out of your day to engage with us in this conversation. So I am going to read 2-sentence descriptions of people, so you can know who they are, you can know where they come from. And so we're going to start with, I'm going to start with the Reverend Atakunle. Blessings to you. The Reverend Atakunle is a compassionate spiritual caregiver whose vocation beyond faith traditions have been proven in his passion for humanity and environmental safety, having successfully undertaken projects in the United States and Africa. He is a Harvard Divinity School alumni, ambassador, and currently pastors the rector and serves as the rector of the Anglican Church of the Epiphany in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thank you so much for being with us. We have Sister Swa. Swa is a practitioner, she's our Islamic facilitator, and Reverend Atakunle is one of our Christian facilitators. Swa is a practitioner of interfaith and intercultural relations for more than 50 years. Currently, she hosts a podcast on conscious living and parenting. Thank you so much for being with us. Next up, we have our Jewish facilitator, Rabbi Shoshana Friedman. Rabbi Friedman is a rabbi mother living and working in Boston. She has been involved in the climate movement for many years, including direct action and legislative work. She and her husband wrote the climate anthem, "The Tide is Rising," and I had an opportunity to hear that last year. Them singing, them singing it. It was wonderful. We have our second Christian facilitator, Dr. Taliesin Lee, Dr. Taliesin Greenfeld Lee, who you heard from earlier. She was formerly a molecular biologist before attending seminary and earning her doctorate in ecological ethics from Boston University. Along with teaching, preaching, and writing, she is a United Methodist Climate Resiliency Chaplain in the greater Boston area. Thank you so much for being with us. Next up, we have two more introductions here of facilitators. We have Venerable Prius. Venerable Prius is from the Bangladesh, serving as the Buddhist chaplain at Tufts University. He is a Buddhist monarch, and he could tell you which type of Buddhist monarch he is in his session for more than 15 years. Thank you so much for being with us. And last but not least, we have Mia Johnson, who is the vice chair of the NICOB and the New England, the Native American Center in Boston, which is one of our partner organizations that have helped bring this together. She's an organizer. She's passionate about justice issues. And we thank you so much for being here. So now we're going to go into our breakout sessions. We're going to have someone break us out, and then we will proceed on. Thank you so much.